No one noticed the silence. Not at first. The crystal glasses were still clinking. The orchestra was still playing softly beneath the stars. Hollywood's brightest legends were still laughing beneath the glowing lights of Beverly Hills. But then, one woman began walking across the room. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't trying to attract attention. She simply walked with the quiet confidence of someone who never needed the world to notice her, because the world always did. Every conversation slowly faded. Every pair of eyes drifted toward her. Even the musicians seemed to lower the volume without realizing why. She was walking toward only one man, Elvis Presley. Only 22 years old, the most talked-about musician in America. The boy who had turned the music industry upside down. The young man whose voice made stadiums erupt, yet who still felt like an outsider whenever he stepped into a room filled with Hollywood royalty. He stood near the French doors with nothing more than a bottle of Coca-Cola in his hand. His perfectly tailored dark suit couldn't hide the nervous habit of shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He smiled politely whenever someone recognized him, but inside, he wished he were back in Memphis, back where people knew him before fame, back where conversations felt real. Hollywood frightened him in ways screaming crowds never could. Actors discussed Shakespeare. Directors debated cinema. Writers spoke in languages he barely understood. Elvis often wondered whether everyone in the room secretly believed he was simply a singer pretending to become an actor. Then he saw her. Audrey Hepburn, the Academy Award-winning actress whose elegance seemed almost impossible. She didn't move like other people. She floated. Every step carried grace. Every smile carried kindness. She wore a simple black evening dress without expensive diamonds or dramatic jewelry. She didn't need them. Her smile was brighter than anything money could buy. Elvis had watched Roman Holiday more than once, not because anyone had asked him to, because he genuinely admired her. There was something honest about her performances. She never appeared to be acting. She simply became another person. It was magic. And now, that magic was walking directly toward him. Elvis swallowed. His palms suddenly became warm. There was no stage, no microphone, no audience screaming his name. Yet somehow, he had never felt more nervous. Audrey stopped only a few feet away. She smiled. Not the practiced smile photographers expected. A real one. Warm, gentle, almost shy. "Mr. Presley," she said softly, "I've been hoping to meet you all evening." For a brief second, Elvis genuinely thought she was speaking to someone standing behind him. He looked over his shoulder. No one. She meant him. "You wanted to meet me?" Audrey laughed quietly. "Of course. I've admired you for quite some time." Those words felt impossible. The biggest actress in Hollywood admired him? Elvis rubbed the back of his neck. "Ma'am, I think you've got that backwards. I'm the one who's admired you." Her eyes sparkled. "Perhaps we admire each other?" The answer made Elvis laugh. The nervousness began disappearing, only slightly. The two legends stood there for a few moments, speaking quietly, while the rest of Hollywood continued celebrating around them. Neither realized how many curious eyes had begun watching. Frank Sinatra glanced toward them from across the room. Cary Grant smiled as he noticed the unexpected conversation. Grace Kelly whispered something to a nearby producer. Everyone wondered, What could Audrey Hepburn possibly want from Elvis Presley? The answer surprised every single person there. Audrey leaned slightly closer, almost as though she were about to reveal a secret. "I'm preparing for a new motion picture." Elvis nodded politely. "The director wants one particular scene to feel authentic." Another nod. "My character has to dance." She paused. "To rock and roll." Elvis smiled. "I reckon I can help with that." Audrey shook her head gently. "You misunderstand. I don't simply need advice." Another pause. Then came the sentence that would later become one of the most unforgettable stories ever whispered throughout Hollywood. "I would like for you to teach me." Silence. Complete silence. Elvis stared at her. Surely he had misunderstood. "You mean right now?" Audrey nodded. "Right here." She looked around the ballroom. "Tonight. I want to learn from the best." For several seconds, Elvis couldn't answer. His mind raced. Thousands of screaming fans had never left him speechless. One quiet request from Audrey Hepburn had. Finally, he laughed. Not because it was funny, because he simply didn't know what else to do. "You really want me to teach you?" She smiled. "I've trained in ballet for years. I know discipline. I know technique. But I have absolutely no idea how freedom dances." Elvis looked confused. "Freedom?" "Yes." She pointed gently toward him. "That's what I see whenever you perform. Everyone else dances with rules. You dance like there aren't any." Those words struck Elvis deeper than she realized. People had called his dancing wild, dangerous, improper, scandalous, even sinful. Very few had ever called it freedom. For the first time that evening, he didn't feel like an awkward young singer trying to fit into Hollywood. He simply felt understood. He smiled, a genuine smile, one rarely captured by photographers. Then, without planning the words, without rehearsing them, without realizing he was about to create a memory remembered for decades, Elvis extended his hand. "I'll teach you rock and roll." "If you'll teach me ballet." Audrey froze, only for a heartbeat. Then she burst into laughter so genuine that several nearby guests turned toward them. It wasn't polite laughter. It wasn't Hollywood laughter. It was joyful, completely real. She reached out and shook his hand. "You have yourself a deal, Mr. Presley." Around them, people slowly began gathering. Nobody announced anything. Nobody invited an audience. Yet somehow, within minutes, nearly every legendary name inside the mansion had quietly surrounded them. No cameras flashed, no reporters interrupted, no publicity manager arranged the moment. It happened naturally, because every person present sensed they were about to witness something special, something no scriptwriter could have imagined. Someone reached for the record player. The music changed. The first guitar notes echoed across the ballroom. And Elvis looked at Audrey, knowing that within moments, Hollywood would witness something far more beautiful than another glamorous party. Two legends about to become students. And neither of them had any idea that this simple dance lesson would become one of the most unforgettable memories of their lives. Music began softly, A steady rhythm floated through the grand ballroom, and for a brief moment, no one spoke. Nearly every guest stood perfectly still. Hollywood's greatest actors, award-winning directors, famous musicians, they had all forgotten their conversations. Every eye was fixed on the same scene. Elvis Presley smiled nervously. "Now don't expect miracles," he said with a quiet laugh. "I've never taught anyone before." Audrey folded her hands gracefully. "Neither have I." "Then I suppose we're both in trouble." The crowd laughed gently. The tension disappeared. What had started as a glamorous evening had suddenly become something wonderfully human. Elvis stepped closer. "The first thing you've got to forget," he paused, "is trying to look perfect." Audrey raised an eyebrow. "That is a difficult request for an actress." Elvis grinned. "That's exactly why I'm asking." He pointed toward the musicians. "Rock and roll isn't about perfect steps. It isn't about counting. It isn't about remembering where your feet belong. It's about forgetting that anyone's watching." Audrey looked around at the hundreds of famous faces surrounding them. "I think that may be impossible tonight." Everyone laughed again. Elvis leaned forward. "Then forget they're famous." She smiled. "And if I cannot?" "Close your eyes." She hesitated only for a heartbeat. Then she closed them. The ballroom became unusually quiet. Elvis gently tapped the rhythm with his polished shoe. "Listen. Don't dance. Just listen." The beat echoed through the room. Slowly, Audrey's shoulders relaxed. Her breathing became calmer. The elegant posture expected from every Hollywood actress slowly disappeared. For the first time that evening, she wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was simply listening. "Now," Elvis whispered, "take one step." She did. Another. Then another. Not perfectly, not gracefully, simply naturally. Elvis smiled. "There you go." "You've already started." She opened her eyes. "I have." "You stopped thinking." The crowd watched in complete silence. Then Elvis began moving. Not the wild stage performance that had shocked television audiences across America. Not the controversial movements newspapers loved to criticize. Just enough movement to let the music breathe. Audrey observed carefully. Her years of ballet training immediately searched for rules. Where should the foot land? When should the shoulder move? How many counts between each turn? There were no answers. Rock and roll refused to fit inside the disciplined world she knew. She copied him anyway. The result was charming. Her movements remained beautifully elegant, almost too elegant. She looked less like a rock and roll dancer and more like a princess trying to discover what freedom felt like. Elvis laughed warmly. "You're still asking permission." She blinked. "Permission? To move? You don't need it." The words lingered in her mind. She tried again. This time, she stopped worrying. Her shoulders loosened. Her smile became genuine. Her laughter filled the ballroom. The guests erupted into applause. Frank Sinatra clapped loudly. Cary Grant shook his head with admiration. Grace Kelly covered her mouth as she laughed. Even the orchestra smiled while continuing to play. Audrey looked at Elvis. "I believe I've embarrassed myself." He shook his head immediately. "No, ma'am. You've done something much harder." "And what is that?" "You've allowed yourself to be imperfect." The ballroom became quiet again. Those words carried more weight than anyone expected. For years, Hollywood had demanded perfection from Audrey Hepburn. Every photograph, every interview, every performance, every public appearance. Perfection. Yet tonight, she had laughed at herself. And somehow, she looked even more beautiful because of it. Audrey smiled softly. "Very well, Mr. Presley." "I believe it's my turn." Elvis's confident expression disappeared instantly. "Oh, now. I was hoping you might forget that part." "A promise is a promise." Someone quickly replaced the lively record with a classical composition. The atmosphere changed immediately. Elegant strings floated through the ballroom. Audrey stepped into the center of the polished floor. Everything about her transformed. Only moments earlier, she had been an actress learning something unfamiliar. Now, she became the ballerina she had once dreamed of becoming. Her posture straightened. Her movements became impossibly graceful. It looked almost unreal. She wasn't dancing. She seemed to float above the floor. The room watched in complete amazement. Even Elvis forgot to breathe. When the music softened, Audrey turned toward him. "Your lesson begins." The crowd burst into cheerful applause. Elvis slowly walked forward. "I've made a terrible mistake." "You certainly have," Audrey replied with a playful smile. She positioned his feet carefully. "No, not like that. Gently." He tried, failed. The audience laughed. She adjusted his shoulders. "They're much too tense." "I'm terrified." "I can see that." Another wave of laughter echoed through the ballroom. Elvis attempted the first simple position. His knees bent awkwardly. His balance disappeared. He stumbled backward. Frank Sinatra laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. Cary Grant wiped tears from his eyes. Even the waiters struggled to hide their smiles. Elvis pointed toward the audience. "They're enjoying this far too much." Audrey laughed. "That means you're doing wonderfully." He looked puzzled. "I'm making a complete fool of myself." "No," she answered quietly. "You're giving people permission to laugh with kindness." Those words struck him. Throughout his career, people had laughed at him. Sometimes with admiration, sometimes with cruelty. But tonight felt different. Nobody was mocking him. They were celebrating him. Celebrating his willingness to try. He attempted another movement. This time, he nearly lost his balance completely. Without thinking, Audrey reached forward and caught him before he could fall. For just a brief moment, neither moved, neither spoke. The music continued softly around them. The laughter faded. The ballroom grew silent. Their eyes met. Not as two celebrities, not as two performers, simply as two people, each recognizing something familiar inside the other. The fear of not being enough, the pressure of living beneath impossible expectations, the quiet loneliness hidden behind worldwide fame. Audrey finally smiled. "You know something, Elvis?" "What?" "I don't think this evening was ever about dancing." He looked at her curiously. "What was it about, then?" She answered without hesitation. "Understanding." The room remained silent. No applause, no laughter, because every person standing there suddenly realized they weren't watching two legends perform. They were watching two human beings discover that greatness had never separated them. It had simply hidden how much they actually had in common. And before the night was over, one quiet conversation on the moonlit terrace would reveal a truth that neither of them would ever forget. The applause slowly faded. One by one, the guests returned to their conversations. The orchestra resumed its gentle melodies. Champagne glasses clinked once again. Hollywood's glittering party continued as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But for Elvis Presley, everything had changed. He stepped outside onto the moonlit terrace, grateful for the cool California night. Beyond the gardens, the lights of Los Angeles stretched endlessly across the hills, like thousands of tiny stars. For the first time that evening, he could breathe. The silence reminded him of home, of quiet nights in Memphis, of sitting on his mother's porch long before the screaming crowds, the flashing cameras, and the impossible expectations. He rested both hands on the stone railing and stared into the distance. Then he heard soft footsteps behind him. He didn't need to turn around. He already knew who it was. "I thought I might find you here." Audrey's gentle voice carried through the evening air. Elvis smiled. "I guess I still don't know what to do after a room full of movie stars watches me fail at ballet." Audrey laughed softly. "You didn't fail." "I believe everyone inside would disagree." "They would be wrong." She stepped beside him, looking out over the city. "For a few minutes." "You forgot you were Elvis Presley." He looked at her. "What do you mean?" "You weren't protecting an image. You weren't trying to impress anyone. You simply laughed." She paused before continuing. "And that's incredibly rare." Elvis lowered his eyes. "You know, I spend so much time worrying about disappointing people. The fans, the studio, my family. Sometimes I wonder if they love me, or the man they expect me to be." For several quiet moments, neither of them spoke. The distant sound of music drifted from inside the mansion. Finally, Audrey answered. "I understand that feeling better than you might imagine." Elvis looked surprised. "You?" She nodded. "The world believes they know me. They see the dresses, the awards, the photographs. But they don't see the frightened young woman who still wonders whether she belongs here." Elvis frowned. "You've won an Academy Award. You've worked with the greatest directors alive. People adore you." "And they adore you." She smiled gently. "But admiration doesn't silence doubt." Her words settled into the night like falling leaves. For the first time, Elvis realized fame had not protected either of them from fear. It had simply hidden it behind bright lights. After a long silence, Audrey reached into her small evening purse. "I almost forgot." She removed a folded piece of paper. "My address." Elvis looked puzzled. "In case you ever wish to write." He smiled. "You really think we'd write letters?" "I hope so." "I've enjoyed tonight far too much to let it become only a memory." Elvis carefully folded the paper and slipped it into the inside pocket of his jacket. "I'll write." "And I'll answer." They shook hands once more, but before either of them let go, Audrey smiled mischievously. "There's one condition." "Oh?" "The next time we meet, you'll show me a better rock and roll dance." Elvis laughed. "And you'll teach me another ballet lesson?" "Only if you're brave enough." "I wasn't brave tonight." She looked directly into his eyes. "Elvis, you stood before the biggest names in Hollywood and willingly allowed yourself to look imperfect. That's bravery. Those words stayed with him long after the music ended, long after the guests went home, long after the lights inside the mansion were switched off. Months passed. True to their promise, letters quietly traveled between Memphis and Europe, between film sets and recording studios. Sometimes the notes were only a few sentences long. Sometimes they were pages filled with stories about exhausting rehearsals, difficult directors, lonely hotel rooms, and dreams that still felt impossible despite worldwide fame. Whenever Audrey finished a new film, Elvis sent flowers. Whenever Elvis released another successful record, a handwritten note arrived congratulating him. Neither expected anything in return. Their friendship needed no publicity, no photographers, no headlines, just mutual respect. Years later, when interviewers asked Audrey Hepburn about the kindest people she had met in Hollywood, she almost always smiled before answering. Elvis Presley. The reporters usually looked surprised. The singer? She nodded. They expected confidence. What I found was kindness. They expected a superstar. I found a gentleman. He laughed at himself. He listened. And he treated everyone exactly the same. On other occasions, friends would ask Elvis about the unforgettable night he tried ballet. He always laughed before attempting one of Audrey's elegant ballet positions. He never managed to perform it correctly, not even once. Everyone watching would burst into laughter, including Elvis himself. Then his smile would slowly soften. You know, I learned something that night. People usually expected him to speak about dancing. Instead, he always said something much deeper. I learned that real greatness isn't about being the best at everything. It's about respecting people whose gifts are different from your own. It's about having enough confidence to become a beginner again, and enough humility to let someone else become your teacher. Those who heard him rarely forgot those words. Time moved forward. Hollywood changed. Music changed. Movies changed. Entire generations grew up. Yet among those fortunate enough to attend that remarkable evening, one memory never disappeared. Not the dancing, not the laughter, not the applause, but the image of two of the most famous people on earth, setting aside pride, setting aside reputation, setting aside perfection, simply choosing to learn from one another. History often remembers legends for the records they break, the awards they win, the crowds they gather, or the fortunes they earn. But sometimes, the moments that truly define greatness happen far away from cameras, in quiet conversations, in genuine laughter, in simple acts of humility. On that unforgettable summer evening, Elvis Presley never became a ballet dancer. Audrey Hepburn never became a rock and roll star. Neither mastered the other's world. They discovered something infinitely more valuable. That true elegance wears humility. That true confidence welcomes failure. And that the greatest artists never stop becoming students. Perhaps that is why, decades later, the world still remembers both of them. Not only because they changed music, not only because they changed cinema, but because behind the fame, behind the applause, behind the history, they never stopped being beautifully human. And maybe that was the greatest performance either of them ever gave.